Hey mateys, welcome back to the channel. A lot more cards to go through today, but before I do that, let me just tell you how the end of this review season is going to go. Basically, tomorrow on the 4th, they're going to be doing the final review stream, and they're going to dump a load of cards after that. So I'm not going to be doing individual reviews of the rest of the cards. Instead, I'm going to do a whole set. Once the whole set's reviewed, I'm going to be reviewing it live on my Twitch channel on Thursday afternoon UK time alongside Board Control. So yeah, if you want to check out live, come along. We're going to have a live voting system as well, so if you want to give your opinion on the cards, you're free to do that as well. But if you can't make it, then you can always watch the video on my Twitch VODs, or you can watch it on this YouTube channel. I'm going to upload the whole thing onto here, so don't worry if you can't make it. I'll put links towards my Twitch channel in the description of this video. Alright, let's get back into card reviews. Depth Charge. This is a 1 mana 0/5 neutral card. At the start of your turn, deal 5 damage to all minions. So, kind of like a cheaper Doomsayer, although it doesn't hit as big things and doesn't work through things like Divine Shield. So is this card good? Well, in the early turns, it's quite hard to deal 5 damage, at least on like turns 1 or 2 for a deck, although it is quite a lot easier than 7 with the Doomsayer. If your opponent were to have developed a 1-drop and maybe a 2-drop and you drop this on your turn 2, it's probably not going to go off, whereas a Doomsayer would go off in that scenario. If you were to drop this on your turn 1, well, it's probably going to go off, but it's going to be less impactful because all it's going to be doing is killing your opponent's 1-drop if they played one and then blocking their turn 2. Obviously, tempo is great, and being half the mana cost of Doomsayer is fantastic. You can combo this with a lot of other cheaper things. Things like Rare Frost become a bit more viable to combo with this card. I would say that buffing the health of this card is probably not that good. Unless you can freeze the opponent's board, the opponent is likely to have at least some amount of damage they can sink into the Depth Charge. So if you were to like Power Word Shield this, and the opponent couldn't clear it, well, they're probably just going to sink 2 damage into it, so the thing itself just dies. So it's not really like you're going to get multiple procs of this very often. Essentially, the value of Doomsayer comes from a tempo reset and the fact that you deny your opponent from developing the board if they can't deal with the Doomsayer. Obviously, that amount of value is greater if you do it on a later turn. So if you do it on turn 3, you're denying 3 mana's worth of development and you're giving yourself 4 mana worth of free development on the next turn. If you drop this on a turn 1 and it goes off, well, you're only denying potentially 2 mana's of development and you're only getting 2 mana of yourself. So the payoff's a bit less. There are some bonuses for Depth Charge in that you can AoE the board and drop the Depth Charge a lot easier than you could do it with a Doomsayer just because it's cheaper. But for the most part, I think it's probably a weaker card than a Doomsayer just because it's easier to clear in terms of health. You don't really need to be dropping it as early as turn 1, so the mana discount isn't super relevant. And the fact that it doesn't kill things like giants and Divine Shield minions. The way I could see this card seeing play is through redundancy, particularly in Highlander style decks. Even if this card turns out to be a slightly weaker Doomsayer, it still might see play just because you can run this in addition to Doomsayer. In a normal deck, running maybe 4 Doomsayers seems a little bit of overkill, but in a Highlander deck, certainly running a Doomsayer plus this makes a lot of sense, and it might end up seeing play in particularly decks like Highlander Mage, where the Doomsayer effect could be very, very useful for them. Tentacled Menace. This is a 5 mana 6/5 battlecry. Each player draws a card and swaps their costs. There was a I wouldn't say very similar, but a similar card back in Journey to Ungoro, which was something Explorer. It was a 3/4 that drawed a card from your deck and it made it cost 5. And even in Big Druid, which run a load of like really expensive minions, that card was only okay. And the kind of deck you run Tentacled Menace in would be very similar, where you're running a bunch of big minions. Maybe something like a Dual Paladin, where you run a lot of really heavy cost minions, hoping to cheat them out of your deck. And then maybe the Tentacled Menace can cheat them out mana cost wise. But you're rolling the dice a little bit with the card. You're also having to spend 5 mana on a minion on turn 5. And you're not guaranteed to get a good result. Your opponents also could be running very expensive things. You might have to run cheap spells in your deck, for instance, as well. And if you hit one of them, maybe you're even benefiting your opponent more than yourself. Also, with Dual Paladin, you really don't want this to be coming out of your duels. Something like Prismatic Lens is way more consistent of an effect than Technical Menace, although it doesn't come with a body. So very likely that this card is bad. You know, who knows? Maybe there's a super, extreme meta game where there's one deck with a whole load of cheap stuff in it, and then you have another deck which has a load of expensive stuff in it, and then it could have the right atmosphere for Tentacle Menace to actually get some good value. But for the most part, the card sucks. Cobalts Spoken. This is a 5-mana 3/5 dragon. Battlecry, add 2 1-cost spells from your class to your hand. Now, if you go through all of the classes, there are a few classes which do better than others. I don't know for a fact whether you can get side quests from this. I imagine you can. I imagine you can't get actual quests though. But if you can't get side quests, the power level of this card certainly goes up because they're very synergistic based and you'd rather just have a solid good card. Some good contenders for this are Warrior. They have a lot of good 1-cost spells, things like Whirlwind, Omega Assembly, even the Lackey Generator spell, Shield Slam. They're all quite good and there's not really any duds in that class. Other classes like Paladin, you get a load of secrets which aren't the worst all the time, but it's still probably don't want to be running Cobalts Spoken in your deck. Mage is another good class, especially if you're running some sort of Cyclone Mage where generating 1-cost spells is something you want to be doing anyway. Mage has access to quite a lot of good 1-cost spells, so the average result of this card might be quite good for you. And in Cyclone Mage, you might be wanting to run their new Arcane 1-mana spell, which relies on Dragon Synergy, and this just happens to be a dragon. So it's certainly quite a high value card. And the cards that you get are usually high tempo. Kind of reminds me a little bit like Lackey Generators, honestly. Although a bit less powerful of cards that you get from them. I could see this card seeing a little bit of play, although I don't think it's the strongest of cards. Next, Plate Breaker. 5-mana 5/5 Battlecry, destroy your opponent's armor. Straight out of r/Custom Hearthstone, this one. Although I don't think even them would make the effect of this so devastating. Right, so obviously this is a crazy tech card. If you're a Control Warrior or some form of Druid which stacks a lot of armor, this can be potentially devastating to you. What this card allows you to do against Control Warrior is play a bit more of a value-centric, I'm going to try and grind you out and then finish you off strategy, because before, Warrior had inevitability on you and you had to really just be very aggressive and keep pressuring their life total before they got to the late game and basically just won the game. But with this card, if it's in your deck, essentially any damage you do to armor is completely pointless because you're going to get rid of it, all of it at some point anyway. So instead you could focus on trying to make the most value out of your cards, make the most tempo plays, rather than just pushing face damage. And then once you get your advantage, you play the Plate Breaker, and then you push for face damage when you've gained a bit of advantage throughout the game. Stats-wise, it's not a terrible card. 5-mana 5/5 is acceptable. So in other matchups, it's not the worst thing in the world. Although it's hard to imagine there'll be a meta game where armor will be so prevalent that it's worth just putting this into like a mid-range deck, for example. Instead, this might be a really good tech card for something like OTK Paladin, which historically suffers against some of the decks that can just gain a whole lot of armor, like the Druid, like the Warrior. Instead of having to do 2 combos plus a Zephyrus to kill your opponent, they could just Plate Breaker away some of the armor and then just finish them off with 1 or 2 of the combos. Paying 5 mana to do this effect might actually be a bit tough in OTK Paladin because some of the later turns are you're really tight for mana, so could see play depending on the metagame in a deck like that where they really want to get rid of armor. But I think for the most part this card won't see play unless we see a very lopsided Control/Druid heavy metagame. Next we have Wormrest Purify. This is a 2-mana 3/2 epic. Battlecry, transform all neutral cards in your deck into random class cards from your class. So, from a pure tempo standpoint, this card is pretty bad. you don't want random cards from your class. Even though class cards tend to be better than neutral, they're not going to be better than neutral cards you specifically put in your deck. Instead, this is more of a tech card to get rid of cards that are shuffled into your deck from your opponent. Things like Hakar Bloods, which even you yourself might be shuffling into your deck. You could play like a Hakar deck and have this in it as well, so the Hakar only affects your opponent. Or if your opponent's playing Bomb where they shuffle bombs into that, you can counter with this. Or if they're playing like with the new Albatross card and they're an Albatross sort of hate deck, you can turn all those Albatrosses into class cards for yourself. Which are probably better than the 1-mana 1/1s, but sometimes not by much. But again, this is just a heavy tech card. Unless the meta game really calls for it, it's probably not going to see play. But there is a little bit of potential, like I mentioned, if you're going for a Hakar strategy as your end game, to run maybe one of these cards just to get rid of your own Hakar Bloods. That way you can still play cards from your hand. You don't have to go up to 10 cards and try and discard your own Hakar Bloods. You can still keep playing cards. What's more, in a Hakar style deck, you might be able to run this card instead of Archivist Elysiana sometimes, because you can just fill your deck with Hakar Bloods after you've drawn a few of them, and then transform them into cards, and it's kind of like an anti-fatigue strategy. Although you will take a bit of damage from the Bloods themselves in the process. Outside of that, though, I think this card is just not going to see play. Next for Shaman, we have Stormhammer. Now, this is a great What's that? It's a what weapon? Next for Hunter, we have Stormhammer. 3-mana 3/2. Don't lose durability while you control a dragon. A bit weird as a Hunter card. Like, people were expecting Shaman / Paladin maybe when they saw the art. But we got Hunter somehow. Very similar in stats to Eaglehorn Bow, and the fact that Eaglehorn Bone sometimes gets extra durability. Playing this card, I think it's a little bit easier to trigger the effect. Your secrets are reliant on you having a secret in play and your opponent proccing it, whereas the dragons, you just have to play a dragon and then you can just swing straight away. So it's certainly a lot easier to get the effect of this, and I think it is a very good card and better than Eaglehorn Bow. Secret Highlander Hunter itself might just be a stronger deck than Dragon Hunter, even though I think Stormhammer is a stronger card than Eaglehorn Bow. Although, having said that, with their new 2-mana card, which is essentially a Cobra Shot, plus this, the Dragon variant of Hunter has a lot of sustained damage going towards the face. So if they can just work out some board control and some tempo, they're going to be able to just push a lot of face damage consistently out throughout the game. Overall, I think Stormhammer is a good card in a potentially weak deck, and the Dragon Hunter archetype hasn't entirely impressed me yet. Next up, Priest. Mind Flayer Karj. 3-mana 3/3, Battlecry, choose an enemy minion. Death Rattle, summon a new copy of it. Now, a lot of chat about this card. To me, this seems like a natural fit into Combo Priest. I know Evolved Shaman has been destroying us on ladder for a month and a half or so, but we all forgot the Menace that was Combo Priest before the wild cards were introduced, and it was the #1 deck by quite a mile, rated by pros as the best deck in the meta game, and I think this kind of card fits naturally into it. Now, I've had conversations with people, and a lot of people are saying, oh, it doesn't fit into Combo Priest because it doesn't have a lot of health, and it's not something you want to res from Psychopomp. And I disagree. I think Combo Priest, at its core, is an aggro deck. And aggro decks want to play high tempo minions, stuff that is really efficient mana costed and generally quite cheap. And Mind Flayer Karj is all of those. Even if your opponent plays just a 1-drop, and you get to play a 3-mana 3/3 that summons a 1-drop that your opponent's put in the deck. Something like Eternium Rover, for instance, is a fine pull. If you're playing the mirror match, hitting a cleric with this is actually really good for you as well. I've also heard arguments like, oh, it's only good behind when you play this card because you have to choose an opponent's minion to copy, but that isn't true either. When you're ahead on board as Priest, it's not like your opponent's going to stop playing minions. So many decks are very minion based, and they're going to have to be forced to play minions. There's like scenarios where you've played a cleric and an injured Tolvir, and your opponent's saying, alright, I'm going to play a 4/4 into that, and good luck. I'm threatening 2 potential value trades, and you need to deal with that. Well, if you can't prevent those value trades, at least Mind Flare Karj will get you back a lot of tempo by having a 3/3 that summons like a 4/4. It's like insane amounts of tempo for a 3-drop. In fact, in any sort of tempo matchup, I think this card is really, really strong, and it's going to net you a lot of board control all the time. You can even do something like playing this on turn 3, and then on your turn 4, you can then drop an Ammit and trade off your Mind Flare card so it dies, and then whatever pops out is going to have at least 7 health, which is a very, very strong tempo push. I think where this card actually suffers the most is in control matchups. You're playing an aggro deck, and your opponent is perfectly happy to just play removals or play off the board, going towards the AoEs. And a lot of times it's just basically going to be a 3-mana 3/3 on turn 3 a lot of the time, or you're going to have to be holding it in hand, waiting for it to get some value out of it, which isn't really what you want to be doing against control decks. All in all, I think this is a very, very powerful card. In any sort of tempo matchup, it's going to do a lot of work. Pretty much a piloted shredder for 3 mana that very much often will summon better than a 2-drop. Very, very good card in my opinion. Next we have Chronobreaker. 5 mana 4/5 Death Rattle. If you're holding a dragon, deal 3 damage to all enemy minions. Kind of like a hybrid between Dustbreaker and Chillmore. Dustbreaker obviously a battle cry, which makes it way better. This doesn't have Taunt like Chillmore does, so you're not guaranteed to get the effect off. But the effect is very powerful, and your opponent is inclined to kind of kill this card because any sort of minions that they develop while this is live suffer the 3 damage from the Death Rattle when Chronobreaker dies. So you may see a lot of instances if your opponent has a board full of tokens and you drop a Chronobreaker into it, they're going to be forced to trade all of their minions into your 4/5 and then develop afterwards. So you're going to find that Chronobreaker might actually get a lot of value in that sense. You're not going to take as much face damage. But again, it's obviously worse than Dustbreaker in that it's not immediate. So your opponent doesn't have to take that route if they want to just go and push face damage. Another problem with this card is that the 3 damage it threatens to do is good against like 3 drops or worse, or a bunch of tokens. And they generally tend not to have at least 5 attacks, so Chronobreaker itself might take a couple of attacks to actually trigger its Death Rattle, or you have to trigger it yourself through removal of your own. So there might be a lot of scenarios where you're looking to clear the opponent's board, they have a very wide board and they're threatening to kill you with that board, but you just can't actually kill off your Chronobreaker into anything that they play. The fact that this doesn't have Taunt like Chillmore does means that the AoE is not going to go off all the time. But on the other hand, if you're somewhat ahead on board, you can just be free to drop this onto board and the Death Rattle is entirely positive for you, which gives it a big advantage over things like Dustbreaker and Chillmore, where you couldn't really play them at all when you're ahead on board. To me, I feel like this card is better than Chillmore, basically because it's cheaper, and the fact that you can play it proactively, but worse than Dustbreaker. But hey, Dustbreaker was one of the strongest cards we've ever seen in Hearthstone. So I think a card can be passable even if it doesn't, beat Dustbreaker on paper. There was a card in Druid which was called Fate Weaver, which is another 5-mana card. I think it was like a 5/3 or something. And you get to choose the Death Rattle between 3 damage to everything or +2/+2 to everything. Usually you'd take the 3 damage AoE, and the card tended to not actually be that good. And that card had less health than Chronobreaker, so it was a little bit easier to trigger yourself, which does make Chronobreaker itself look a little bit weaker. Although Fate Weaver, again, it was a symmetric Death Rattle, so you're damaging your own stuff as well. So it was a bit worse to play proactively. Next we have the cute card of the set, Bronze Explorer for Paladin. 3 mana 2/3, Lifesteal, Battlecry, discover a dragon. Also a dragon itself. Stats wise, pretty bad for the cost. There's been better statted Lifesteal minions for 3 mana printed in the past, which haven't really seen a lot of play. But the Discover a Dragon effect makes this certainly stronger, and the fact that it's a dragon itself works with a bunch of your dragon synergy cards. With this card and the Amber Watcher, Dragon Paladin has access to a lot of life restore effects. And from what we've seen, dragon decks and the hand buff style archetype with like Dragon Speaker which is a 5 mana 3/5, which Battlecry hand buffs all your dragons in hand by +3/+3. That effect's really, really slow, so you're going to need these life gain tools to stabilize against aggressive decks so you can play these greedy hand buff cards without dying, essentially. And having lifesteal on a dragon is just a super good effect if you're trying to survive. Lifesteal on hand buff things is one of the best keywords available alongside Rush and then perhaps Taunt. But I think I'd put Lifesteal and Rush as the best two. If you've ever managed to hand buff a Haziliax, you'll know what I'm talking about. The way I look at this card is not to say, oh, it's good with Dragon Speaker, but more that, oh, I have this in my deck that allows me to Dragon Speaker perhaps the rest of my deck, and then we just outvalue decks that way. This also doesn't decrease hand size, and if you've known any decks from me in the past, I've played a bit of hand size Paladin. This has potential to fit in there. Again, the lifesteal effect's pretty useful. You don't have to actually go for Dragon Speaker, you could just go for normal Glowstone Technician hand buff, because it will hit the rest of your non-dragon minions as well. But you could just run this, and maybe the Amber Watcher as well in your deck, and just use them for sort of life gain effects, so you can get away with your greedy hand buff mechanics. Outside of hand buffs, just regular buff effects are really good with Bronze Explorer. The legendary Dragon Rider, Talrifa, Sand Breath, Blessing of Kings, all of these cards scale really, really well with lifesteal. So, very good card, I think, and it will definitely be a staple of potential hand buffy style decks or just Dragon Paladin style decks going forward. For Warrior, we have a Scion of Ruin, or Scion of Ruin, I'm not actually sure how to pronounce that. This is a card that was spoiled a while ago, but we haven't talked about it just yet. But now here it is. It's a 3 mana 3/2 Rush Battlecry. If you invoke twice, summon 2 copies of this. So kind of like 3 mana Restless Mummy plus an extra half of a mummy if you get the effect off. And obviously that is super, super strong. You can even value trade into 1 attack minions or not kill everything off and threaten to deal 9 damage on the next turn. Yeah, I mean, obviously the effect's super strong, but we just haven't seen the Warrior Invoke cards just yet, so kind of got to wait on them to see if the deck as a whole will be good. But obviously this will be a part of it, if it is. If you don't get the Invoke off, it's a below average card, but it's sometimes acceptable as just a bit of removal. Next, Evil Quartermaster, 3 mana 2/3, Battlecry, add a Lackey to your hand and gain 3 armor. Interesting card. It's kind of, the armor and the Lackey are sort of butting heads in archetypes really, because Lackeys in general are seen mostly in tempo decks, whereas armor gain cards in control decks. So this is kind of the meeting of two worlds, as it were. And that makes it kind of hard to place what kind of deck you want to put it in, but as a whole, it just looks like a really solid card. You look at Evil Miscreant, which is a 1/4 that adds 2 Lackeys to your hand, and you have to combo that. Well, this is going to gain you 3 armor as compensation, and probably have fairly similar stat distribution. I'd say a 1/4 might even be better than a 2/3, particularly with the Lackey effects themselves. But yeah, I could actually see this maybe in a Control Warrior deck. Extra synergy for Shield Slam. You know, it's good tempo as a body card. You can just play it when you're happy to play it. Seems like a really nice card. Also, if you're running a Galakron deck, this might go in as well. As you're invoking Galakron, you're going to be using your face for removal. So the extra armor game might help you survive. And it's, you know, decent tempo. If you like compare this to Evil Cable Rat, it looks miles better, so I expect this card will see a fair amount of play, and it looks really strong to me. Next we have Embiggen, a perfectly cromulent card in Hearthstone. 0 mana, give all minions in your deck +2/+2. They cost 1 more, up to 10. So imagine if you use this on like a mountain giant, it's not going to set the base cost to 10, because that would be a bit broken. But yeah, compare this card to Surrender to Madness. That was a 3 mana card in Priest that destroyed 3 of the mana crystals for this +2/+2 effect. The minions in your deck didn't cost 1 more. it seems way better. You don't have to pay the 3 mana up front, and you don't lose 3 mana crystals, so at least the cards in your hand are still like perfectly playable. But comparing it to Surrender to Madness, which was arguably one of the worst cards released this year, just because it's better than that doesn't make this a good card. So let's talk about, is this a good card? 0 mana, you don't lose any tempo immediately for doing the effect. It's only you're potentially losing tempo down the line. But the stat increase probably makes up for it a little bit. Now, I've seen a lot of people trying a deck build and Embiggen decks, and a lot of people are going for super cheap minions, and a lot of them saying like, when I play Embiggen, I want to be able to play the cards I get immediately. I don't know if that's the best way about going with this card. I think because it costs 0 mana to do, you're essentially going to be relying on your starting hand to get you to like turn 4 or 5, right? And then you're going to be top decking cards. And it's your top deck cards that'll be the ones that are going to be hand buffed, right? So if you're top decking cards that are hand buffed, you have 2 ways to go about it. Either you're playing on curve minions, like 5 mana, 6 mana, whatever, and then you don't need to draw cards. Or you're wanting to draw cards and playing multiple, and then you're playing multiple minions that you've drawn on the same turn. However, because the minions that you're drawing cost 1 more, it's actually very tough to be playing both a card draw card on a turn and 2 minions that are more expensive all on the same turn. It's going to be mana inefficient and just hard to do in general. Embiggen seems more like a card where you want to be relying on your opening hand to get you towards turn 5, 6 or whatever, and then you want the cards that you're drawing to be essentially filling out your curve for the rest of it there. So honestly, it seems like mid-range minions are your go-to cards, really. Ideally, you want to be playing minions that take advantage of the effect. There are certain cards in Druid right now, like Oasis Surger, which can copy itself, essentially giving you +4/+4 on this card. Even if you're not playing Quest Druid, playing Embiggen, and you play a 6 mana Oasis Surger, well, it's kind of like you got the Quest Druid reward because you can get 2 5/5s with Rush. Other cards, like their conditional 0 mana 3/5 Taunt, that card says cost 0, so even though the base card will cost 1 more mana, so if you can activate its effect of playing a spell that costs 5 or more, the Taunt card is going to cost 0 mana, and if you've Embiggened it, well, you're going to get a 5/7 Taunt for 0 mana instead of a 3/5, which is way better. So honestly, I think maybe you could run this card in Quest Druid? ? Although Quest Druid is pretty spell heavy, so it's certainly a bit of a downside on this card. But like even hitting something like Crystal Merchant is potentially powerful because it turns into a 3/6. Mana cost wise, it might not be worth it for the deck. But if I were to initially build an Embiggen deck, I would want to be running basically cards that scale really well off hand buffs, things that duplicate themselves, things that you can mana cheat to 0, or things like Lifesteal, something like Vicious Scale Hide even, is potentially really strong with an Embiggen. Another cool synergy is with Vargoth. If you play Vargoth Embiggen on 4, well, you're going to get another Embiggen out. It's going to make your deck cost 2 more, but you get the +4/+4. Maybe that's worth it, maybe it's not. As for the card text, I'm a little bit surprised we've got this SpongeBob SquarePants reference rather than the Simpsons one. Both cartoons, I guess, featuring yellow characters. Alright, next up we have Goru the Might Tree. 7 mana, 5/10. Taunt, battle cry for the rest of the game. Your treants have +1/+1. One of these days, treants are going to be good, says Blizzard. We're going to keep pushing the synergies. Maybe something will stick. Is this it? I mean, it's certainly a strong enough effect. It's kind of like a permanent Stormwind champion. Curves really nice into their twin spell, which summons 5 treants on turn 8. Turning that from 10/10 worth of stats into 15/15. So essentially, you play this and then the 8 mana spell, and then again the 8 mana spell, and you got 30/30 of stats instead of 20/20, which is quite a big increase, to be honest. 7 mana for 5/10 is Ancient of War stats. Card hasn't seen play for a long time, but of course you get the additional bonus of this card. Is that enough to push it over the line? Probably not. Although, if you play this card and then play it again via Floop, suddenly +2/+2 on your Treants is pretty scary. It's kind of like the Warlock Lackey Legendary, which turns them all into 4/4s. And it's pretty easy, a lot easier to spam Treants than Lackeys, I think. So, who knows? Goru the Might Treant deck. 4/4s are scary. And finally, Tree Enforcements. 1 mana spell, choose one, give a minion +2 health and taunt, or summon a 2/2 Treant. We get the choose both option on this. It's kind of like the Taunt Lackey, but a 2/2 version. Seems like a decent enough card. Obviously, if you're playing Treant Druid, you want to put this in the deck. You can put it in Quest Druid. It's something you can play immediately. Usually they don't really do much other than that Discover spell on their turn 2. But this is something that they can fit in for 1 mana, which is going to give them some tempo. And then later on, it can give something Taunt. So if you want to try and stabilize a bit, give one of your Oasis Surges extra health and Taunt. Seems quite good. How good is a 1 mana 2/2 right now? Probably not as good as it used to be. Power creep, etc, etc. Although there's not a huge lot of 1-drops that are going to be able to contest this card. If we're in a 2 mana 2/3 meta game, a 1 mana 2/2 feels a bit worse, and that could be the case as they're introducing a lot of 2/3s into this set. Overall, seems like a solid card. Might make its way into Quest Druid, although I'm not 100% sold on that. But if Treant Druid's a thing, that you can guarantee this is going to be in the deck. A little bit of potential for this card as well in like Auctioneer style decks as well. Giving your Pyromancers, for instance, extra health is really nice. Or giving your Auctioneer extra health on your Auctioneer turn so it's harder to remove. Alright, that is it for all the cards that I'm going to be doing these mini reviews on. We've got the full card reveal tomorrow, and then after that all the cards will be eventually revealed on like Facebook or whatever. And then on Thursday, a little reminder, going to be doing that live review. Come check it out on my stream. Link will be in the description. And see you there. Don't be late or square, I guess.